tech news across Canada. If you're listening to the show for the first time, welcome. We're glad you're with us. We are doing the final edition of the NCAA recap. Unfortunately, this is the part of the month or year that we hate when football is winding down. But be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, @chatfootball, Instagram, CFC_football, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as sign up for our exclusive gold membership so that you can tune into all of the rankings, the CFC 100, the CFC 60, the CFC40, which we are talking about tonight, on CanadaFootballChat.com under the rankings tab. We have got our faithful NCAA Quincy Forde joining us again. How's it going, Quincy?
I'm good. How are you?
We're good. We're going to talk about the SEC and the Big 10 and the Big 12 and the ACC and the MAC, and we're really just kind of letting you dictate who we're going to talk about today. So yeah. Let's start off with the SEC. Who do you got for us?
Yeah, we got all the good stuff today. I think it'd be appropriate to start with none other than John Mechie at Alabama, coming off the national championship. He's got to be the first name you bring up. Through most of the year, John Mechie was Alabama's second receiver, right behind Heisman winner Devontae Smith, and he's a guy who's set to step into the number one role come next year. But John Mechie on the season, 55 receptions, 916 receiving yards. So he nearly cracked the 1K mark. And if it weren't for a slightly shortened season, SEC was still 10 games, but normally they get a game or two more. I'd say he would have probably cracked the 1K mark. So that's big for a Canadian sophomore who should be an early round guy next year. Top 3 rounds for sure in next year's draft. You got to think he's going to enter early.
Does he have a PFF score yet?
On the season, he finished with a 73.1 grade as a receiver. And more notably, what earns respect from me a little, we got 82.9 run blocking grade. And that's something that I certainly noticed when I watched him is he's a physical guy out there. That's a big part of his game. He's not the biggest at 6 feet, 195 pounds. Like if you watch the national championship game, yeah, Devontae Smith had a huge gain on this screen pass and John Mechie just manhandled the guy he was blocking. I think we all saw that massive hit on a Florida cornerback in the SEC championship. So Mechie definitely had a fantastic season.
When Smith went out in the first half because of his hand, Mechie kind of took over in the second half.
In the third quarter, I fell asleep because at that point it was pretty clear that Alabama had the game, but John Mechie stepped in. He was pretty good, improved even more in the second half, but Devontae Smith, 215 yards receiving in the first half. That's unbelievable.
Insane.
Over somewhere else in the SEC, we got Josh Palmer, a CFC40 who should be an NFL pick this year, I think. He only had 475 yards receiving, but I just checking it out because I was curious. They have the worst quarterbacking situation in the SEC with Jarrett Garantano. Guys, terrible. Jarrett Garantano's transferring out with the one free transfer rule they have because of COVID. They can do that this year. So Garantano's out and they're bringing in Hendon Hooker from Virginia Tech, who should be an upgrade at the quarterback position. But too bad Josh Palmer is going to be gone because he's a guy who's in the Senior Bowl this year. So you got to think he's done entering the NFL draft now. That's probably the next step for him. But 475 yards receiving on the season. I was looking and I figured I'd check it out. Devontae Smith had more yards receiving than the top 8 Tennessee targets combined. The top 8 receivers on Tennessee had less yards combined than Devontae Smith. So that just goes to show Tennessee wasn't a very prolific passing offense. So Josh Palmer would have been a 1,000-yard receiver somewhere else. I think he's definitely the number one receiver in CFC40 for sure.
Well, you've got him ranked in the top 10, right?
Yeah, he was 6th on the first edition, but even more so as the season's gone on. I'm not sure he'll get any higher than that, but I feel like the distance between I have Palmer 6th and Jana 7th. I think the distance between those two has grown a little more. I always thought Palmer was definitely the number one guy But I think Palmer's proven himself to be that much more special than Terrell Jana, I think.
Who else do you got for us?
Oh, well, I guess Ole Miss, I forgot about them. They have Dean Leonard, so he's a CFC40 guy. One of my favorites, as I wrote in our Path to the Draft article. He came out stronger in the back half of the year. I'm sure you guys are quite familiar over in Western Canada. I'm a little more distance from there.
How did Ole Miss do this year?
They're below 500. They struggled a lot against
4 and 5.
The defensive end is at Ole Miss as well.
Yeah, Tavius Robinson.
I think he actually played probably more than the other guy most of the year.
Yeah, he did. Dean Leonard finished the season 63.2 defensive grade. That just sounds bad compared to the top guys, but that's still a pretty solid grade. But finished the season strong. In the bowl game, was their best coverage guy, had a 76.6 coverage grade in that Indiana game. And he was a guy who, like, you could tell, like, you guys would have watched him out there, and I'm sure you guys saw right from high school, the guy's an athletic freak. He's a guy who had to, like, kind of put that together as the year went on, and he got stronger for sure. And you got to think he's a guy who almost certainly going back next year.
I think he is. I think he's already declared he's going back. I saw that the other day somewhere. I saw that, or somebody told me that.
Yeah, but you had him and Tavius Robinson over there. But with the CFL, they don't know whether they haven't really made clear what they're going to do with the NCAA guys in the draft. Like the U Sports guys opted in or out, but it's a little weird not knowing. They don't know whether they're going to have NCAA guys opt in or opt out, or if they're just going to keep all the seniors from this past year in the draft, regardless of whether they're going back for another year or not.
Is it Amen going back?
No, I think Amen Ogbong Bamiga declared.
I remember him and Dean Leonard. I don't know if they won that year. That might have been the last year they won. There's only like 4 teams.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Notre Dame kind of like one of those programs that's like kind of newly over the past like decade or so gotten like pretty good?
They were really good in Amen's time. They would be one of the, like St. Francis is the team in Calgary.
And Henry Wisewood.
And Henry Wisewood was okay, but Notre Dame had a run there for a long time. They've had a bunch of other players. Like they probably had more players from there played pro than St. Francis, because they had a bunch of players have gone through that school.
There are a couple of CFC40 offensive linemen out of St. Francis who are both at Calgary.
Well, that game actually probably gets more attendance than like a Dinos game. So like when those two teams play each other it's a big deal. It's a big deal in Calgary.
They rent out McMahon Stadium for it.
I think generally Notre Dame back in the day would have the athletes, and then St. Francis would somehow find a way to win. Not that St. Francis is ever really short on athletes either.
They don't really need to somehow find a way. They just do.
All the best athletes in the city end up at 2 schools.
Imagine that.
Shocker. The 2 private Catholic schools. Yeah. Because that's not a model that's played out around North America. John Mechie, just to add some more context there, there's only 2 players I've ever watched in our time that, say, Katie and I have done the lists or been involved with them, where we watched in grade 10 and we thought, well, I thought, I'm not going to speak on Katie's behalf, because back in the day we only had 1 list and there was only 100 prospects on the list, and the prospect list included the CJIP players. But I remember John Mechie and Chubba Hubbard are the only 2 players that we ranked them on the list because we just completely were blown away by their film, thinking they were like juniors going into their senior year. We ranked them when they were either in grade 9 or grade 10. And people sent us back messages and we're like, what are you doing? Because back then when you started recruiting lists, it was like, you just pick the best players and put them on the list.
Yeah.
And Mechie, like, all of a sudden was down in Maryland and like had this insane film, and then went to a couple of combines, or not combines, but summer camps, and absolutely ran a blistering 40 time, and then had all these offers. And then he went to another prep school even after he had all the offers. But those are the only 2 players I've ever watched in my time doing the lists where I completely mistaked like a grade 9 or 10.
And it's nice to see the guys in that like era, the new era, are getting into like their draft years and stuff now. So we get to see how they ended up.
Who's next on our list?
We'll go over to the Big Ten, and there were a couple guys in the Big Ten I figure we should touch on at least. And Alaric Jackson was first team All Big Ten, and Chase Brown picked up the 3rd team All Big Ten honors. Alaric Jackson is a guy who should go in the first 3 rounds of this NFL draft. Left tackle at Iowa, who's been a 4-year starter. but he's a guy who finished the season with 74.2 pass blocking grade, 73.6 run blocking grade. Guy looks good. Was originally, like, it seemed like he was originally more highly regarded guy between him and Tristan Wirfs, but then Wirfs kind of overtook him and has been like arguably a NFL Rookie of the Year candidate. But
can you compare on PFF Tristan Wirfs last season against Alaric Jackson's this season?
Alaric Jackson finished with a 74.4 grade overall. Tristan Wirfs, he finished his senior season with a 92.3 grade.
So he's almost perfect. So, he was almost perfect in college.
Yeah, he was the first. Wasn't he the first tackle off the board this past year?
Was he the 10th pick or something like that?
I want to say he was the first tackle off the board. Yeah, probably 10th pick. There were a lot of first-round tackles this year because there was also Mekhi Becton, Andrew Thomas. I think there was one more.
But Alaric Jackson, he was the kid. He was born in Michigan, he was born in Canada but lived in Michigan.
Alaric Jackson had a very successful season this year, bounce-back season. And Chase Brown was the other all-conference guy running back at Illinois, who started the season off as kind of their number 2 guy, but then overtook Mike Epstein and became their number 1 guy and earned himself third team all Big Ten honors. He looked very impressive on the season, given Illinois is a weaker team in that conference. So,
and it is twin brother. The both of them stayed there this year, right?
Yeah, Sidney Brown, I think, missed the last couple games of the year.
He was like the one that's been at Illinois from the beginning, correct?
Why was he injured?
Yeah. I'm not sure. I want to say I think so, or I'm not sure if he missed the very last one, but he missed like 2 of the last 3 or something. But yeah, like Sidney Brown was the guy who went to Illinois. Chase Brown started at, I think, Western Michigan. And then Sidney Brown started as a true freshman, has been starting since. And then Chase Brown just joined them last year and jumped into the starting role this year. So, and then I think the last guy in the Big Ten who's another big name is Benjamin St-Juste.
Yeah. And
he declared for the draft, so he's going to be in the NFL draft. Probably a smart move. Haven't seen many guys at 6'3" move quite like he does. So he should be probably a day 3 pick. I'd probably say top 5 rounds in the NFL draft. I found him particularly impressive. So
what's his PFF score?
He was really good when he was at CBM. He really upped his stock going to Minnesota.
Yeah.
At Michigan, he didn't get a sniff.
But Benjamin St-Juste finished with a 72.4 defensive grade, 72.6 coverage grade. Last year was slightly better at 75 on defense, 74.2 coverage, but still pretty close, both pretty good grades. So I think Minnesota had a rough season, or at least a rough start to the season, though. Minnesota finished 3-4 this year after going 11-2 last year. Over in the Big 12, I think this is probably the most active conference, certainly in terms of the accolades the guys picked up this year. But for the all-conference teams, Amen Ogbongbemiga was all Big 12 second team, along with Alonzo Adai, true freshman Akeem Messidor, and Chuba Hubbard, despite his slip in production this year, still managed to grab a second team spot there. So a lot of names to cover there. Akeem Messidor was also an honorable mention for defensive freshman of the year, and deservingly so. 10 games, Akeem Messidor had 32 tackles, 6.5 tackles for loss, and 5 sacks, which put him second in the country among true freshmen.
What did he should be with his PFF score?
Akeem Messidor finished with a 71.2 defense grade and 71.5 pass rushing grade. Alonzo Adai, certainly an interesting name because he was pretty high on our CFC40 and should move up higher. For the whole uncertain because the CFL hasn't said what they're doing with their NCAA guys, but given his performance this year, Alonzo Adai, if still in the draft, will certainly move up in the CFC40 rankings. I'm quite sure he had a very high PFF grade, if I remember.
Well, he said he's returning for sure, eh?
Yeah, he did. He's a guy who said he's coming back for a 5th year. So hopefully, I'm guessing his goal is NFL. But 79.1 defensive grade, impressive this year. Like if he has another year next year like he did this year, he in 10 games had an interception along. That was a highlight reel interception too that he had. But no, he had 2 interceptions, but one of them was like a highlight reel interception in like game 1 for them, and had 5 pass breakups, a forced fumble, and 66 tackles. So
that's a bit of a year.
Yeah, and then Amen Ogbong Bamiga, obviously he's a big name, should be a day 3 NFL pick this year, probably first 5 rounds. I know we've talked about him repeatedly. Yeah, Amen Ogbong Bamiga this year. He had one game where he had like 11 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, and 2 fumble recoveries.
Oh, jeez.
Like it was, I saw the stat sheet and I was like, you got to be kidding me.
I think that was the game that you and I were like texting back and forth, and I was like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. As we saw him make that one play where he stripped the guy and recovered it, and then he went on and just did it again.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, with our next guy though, he probably wasn't as much of a factor in the games as we hoped. Same game would have been Chuba Hubbard, the same team, but running back was not as good this year, but will still probably be day 2 pick next year's NFL draft. I mean, 2019, he just did too much to be ignored. So he's
injuries too, didn't he?
Yeah. Like this year he came back, and I think like he played the majority of the season, but I think after like I think he was hurt like pretty much the whole season.
Yeah.
So like he probably like he in hindsight, he should have probably entered last year's draft, even though it was a pretty deep class. But yeah, like he had an unreal season in 2019 where he was an All-American. I want to say like I think he was first team All-American.
Do you think he would have gone higher in the draft last year or this year?
No.
Even
relative to running.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Relative to running backs, he would have been lower relative to his position last year, but overall probably lower this year, like in terms of straight draft position this year.
Okay, yeah.
But because last year there would have been DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Taylor, A.J. Dillon was a little later, but him too, Zach Moss. Yeah, Cam Akers, Zach Moss. So like last year was a crazy running back class, but this year I think he's probably going to be a top 4 guy at least, because I know Etienne and Harris will be in front of him, but 3 could be him. But I think to stick around as like a 3 down back, he's going to have to improve his blocking abilities. So because he is not. That's definitely the biggest area of concern for him. But yeah. And then the other Power 5 conference is ACC, because there's not really much going on with Canadian content in the Pac-12. But ACC had Daniel Joseph, who made the right move moving from Penn State, certainly, because he had a ridiculous year with NC State this year. He had 6.5 sacks this year and 37 tackles. Yeah, 37 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, and 6.5 sacks.
Wow.
So he's also another guy who will probably move up the CFC40. I think, obviously, there's also Patrice Renee at North Carolina, had another, like, came back with a solid year, not quite as good as his past years, but he was this past season he was injured, right? So this season he came back, took a little step back, but still looked solid, and transferring to Rutgers next year, as we were talking about earlier. So should be should definitely get his role back next year because they've had some like younger guys come in. Clint, you said like new coaching, so obviously that's a big factor too.
New coaches makes a big difference. It's crazy that he was like a career backup at Penn State, and then he goes to the ACC and probably was a all-conference performer, whether it's like first, second, or third. But
I was looking through it, and he isn't on the team, but should have been, because I don't know how a guy with 6.5 sacks and 10 tackles for loss, like he would have been among the leaders in the nation in sacks.
Better, well, at least he got to play though, because obviously for some reason somebody did not like him at Penn State.
Yeah.
Probably made a smart choice too, because Penn State, I think, had just a real frustrating year.
Yes.
Let's see. I know they started terribly, but I think they started 0-4, but then won their last 5 games, so they finished 4-5. Too little, too late, but
yeah, pretty frustrating because
they lost their first 5 and won their last 4. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, we stopped watching after.
When they hit 0-5, I was like, oh my goodness.
We're done. See ya.
Yeah. But they lost their star running back, Journey Brown, at the start of the year because doing like all the COVID testing and stuff, they realized he had like a different, like an unrelated heart condition. So Journey Brown is a guy who was supposed to be a top 5 running back in this year's draft, and he had to retire from football like right before the start of the season.
That's unreal.
So that's got to suck as a guy who was about to be NFL bound. Oh yeah, Jesse Luketa was there too. He had a pretty good season. Should be on. Is it next year? Next year's draft boards.
Same with Sutherland. Who was the receiver that went there?
Oh, Theo Johnson. Or Malik Mega.
Oh, yeah, you got him.
Malik Mega, yeah. So, yeah, Theo Johnson, like, played sparingly this year, but he did play. I think he came onto the field as, like, a second tight end with, like, a couple games left in the season. Pat Freiermuth, I think that's how you say his name, who's going to be like a first round, maybe second round NFL pick this year. Their tight end got like, I think, season ending surgery, but it was something that he could have played through, I think. But like, it was like the team was like way out of like conference championship contention. So with 2 games left in the year, being a first round NFL guy, he just called it quits and stopped playing for the last 2 games. And then Theo Johnson had a little bit of a role the last couple games. I think he had like 4 catches on the season, which for a true freshman at a school that's known for producing tight ends, pretty good.
He's one of the freakier players we ever watched film on.
Oh yeah, we pumped his tires hard.
Because he was a guy who he was a guy who was getting the attention he needed up here, so he never went down there. Like he was playing public high school football in Windsor at where was he?
Holy Names.
Yeah, so he was there. His quarterback.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah,
his brother plays at Buffalo.
Dominic. Yeah, he's a CFC40 guy. He had like a couple games to start the year with like 30 receiving yards where it looked like he could actually be like a little part of their offense, but then didn't really do much the rest of the
because the running back went off.
Oh, Jarrett Patterson he was ridiculous.
Yeah,
he had like 400 and
stupid like that.
8 touchdowns. Oh yeah, like that performance was very much a video game like performance from him. Yeah, on the season, Dominic Johnson threw 7 games, 5 catches, 43 yards, and all 5 came in like the first half of the season. So before Jarrett Patterson took off. In the group of 5 conferences, the most Canadian content would be over in the MAC. I know we just started that topic with transitioning into Dominic Johnson. Mohamed Diallo had a ridiculous season with Central Michigan, was first team all MAC And then City Sow was a third-team All-MAC guy at Eastern Michigan. And then Mohamed Diallo.
Diallo from Toronto, or is he from Scarborough? Diallo's from Scarborough. City Sow's from Granby, Quebec, home of the mighty Champlain Cougars.
But yeah, Diallo in 5 games, 9.5 tackles for loss, which leaves him a tackle away from leading the country despite only playing 5 games.
That's sick. He's so in his
So like, yeah, he's a guy who's definitely going to shoot up the rankings.
When your defensive tackle gets two TFLs a game, that'll work.
He did play a lot off the edge this year, but awesome. Yeah, like he played both. He went out of JUCO, had a bunch of offers, including Alabama and Oregon, but chose Texas A&M. And then coming into 2019, he transferred to Central Michigan, but didn't play much. And then this year got a starting role and just made everyone who didn't play him regret it. I think that's most of the Canadian big names for college football.
I'm just curious to see how that Canadian quarterback finally does in the NCAA. Christian Veilleux.
Oh, Christian. Yeah, like I wonder with how bad the Penn State quarterbacks were. You got to wonder if Veilleux sees like an opportunity to like get like good minutes or like carve himself out a role as the starter once the season comes around, because he's a pretty big name recruit.
No, it'll be interesting to see what some of those high profile kids do.
Quincy did a great job this season. We didn't even actually think we were going to have a season, so that was pretty stellar on your part. You're getting ready to put out the next CFC40 ranking once the CFL decides what the heck they're doing. So
get their stuff together.
So we'll wait for that, and that list will be updated and coming out soon. And other than that, that concludes our NCAA coverage for this season. And Quincy, thanks so much for giving us all that stuff. That's awesome.
It's been a pleasure.
All right, so that's it for us, folks. Like I said, be sure to follow us on all our social media platforms. Check out our memberships. The gold membership gets you access to mostly everything on the site. You can do that on CanadaFootballChat.com. Take care.
Looking for more exclusive Canadian recruiting content? Become a CFC Insider Gold or Silver member today for access to rankings, analysis, and the latest recruiting news from across the country.